There's a Romanian school, loosely around spectralism, I suppose, which Iancu definitely belongs to. Because, for instance, his cello solo, okay, so no cellist would ever play a solo like that, of course, because cellists are using their left hands all the time. Iancu's not using his left hand hardly at all, and essentially most of that was one note, just one note. But he's playing constantly with the timbre, with the spectral relations and so on. So it's a way of thinking about sound, which is quite unique, because it's not like drone culture. One note is a drone, but that's not what he's thinking at all. He's essentially saying, well, one note isn't one note. You get a prism and you get some white light, see what happens. So, and this coupled with this phenomenological notion of what matters is the immediate experience of now. That puts you in a very special place in the musical spectrum. How did I get in touch with Iancu? I think it was through the records. The very early LP days, those early records, which somehow I got hold of one, and then I got in touch somehow. I don't remember how I did that either. Probably there was an address on it, I don't know. And then we imported them, because I have a distribution network. And at some point, they said, would you like to do a concert? Then I made sure that it was something that I could actually do. And when I saw the scores, and I thought, yeah, well, this is something I can do. Well, if you were to give me any other modern composer's score that was actual, everything has to be exactly the way it's written, this I couldn't do, because I'm not trained to that level. But in fact, what Iancu wants, I think, are people who can make the kinds of sounds that he needs them to make when he needs them to be made. So you need musicians who've got some kind of imagination and who have a very physical relationship with their instrument. And so Iancu and Anna Maria both construct their music when it was still scores in a form that's accessible to a wide range of training. So, as I said at that gig, there are jazz people there, there are classically trained people there are people with no training there. What they share, and they share it from a listening culture, really, because they've listened to thousands of records and concerts of that kind of music, and it's the same as learning a language. Music is a species of language. If you got somebody into Hyperion who didn't know the language, it wouldn't work. So I think it's that straightforward, really. Mainly through records and the distribution of records outside of Romania. and then invitations to concerts outside of Romania, Iancu has found a different public, an elective public, you might say. So at the Ionescu festival in Bucharest, that's not really an elective public. There are people who are coming to the festival, but people who came, for instance, to the Auto, came because they either know Iancu's music or they've heard about him and want to see it, and they come because they want to come. So, and his records are sold moderately well. So there's a public. When you widen the area from a town, a city, to the world, and in that respect, I think you could say Iancu's music has got more popular over time. I think he has a bigger audience now than he had 20 years ago. I mean, there were always scores, in my experience, until the Eclectic last year. It's the first time I've ever not had a score from Iancu. And it's different. Of course it's different, because Iancu is able to be much more precise with a score, even when he ignores his own scores and suddenly starts to want to hear something else, which happened a lot in concerts. So you'd be trying to follow the score and suddenly you'd be called on to do something else. But then you'd go back. The score was always there like a safety net. And the score was able to specify things which he cannot specify with a gesture. Unless you invent a whole system like Frank Zappa did of special signs that everybody can interpret. And because you're so busy paying attention and locking into what's happening, it's impossible to say, for me anyway, to compare the results of the scored and the unscored versions. But it's a very practical way for him to work, because it means that he can go alone or with one other person to somewhere where he knows people who can assemble the right kind of musicians who will then deliver for him quite quickly what he wants to hear. And on his spectrum, I imagine, of what he wants to achieve, it's working well enough for him, not scoring, that he's happy to do that. Whether he would rather have the greater control that a score offers, I don't know. But maybe for him, on that continuum, it's working, and therefore he'll experiment with it further and see where it goes. Because also it's a special thing to work with different musicians all the time. When you work with the same musicians, you know them, what they can do, and they know essentially what you want. When you've got new people, you have very quickly to get them up to the same level, and you will get different results all the time. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a stimulating thing for him, because he's hearing things that he doesn't expect, because he's got people in front of him who have a different understanding of their instrument or what he wants. And he always has the power to stop them. So when he had scores, he was still on the fringe of the composed music spectrum, where the musicians are there to do what the composer wants. And it's clear what the composer wants because it's on the paper. In a situation like the conduction situation, you have no school. So the musicians are still there to do what Iancu wants. You're not there, otherwise it would be an improvisation gig and then you do what you like. You're free. So you're not free. It's not free music. So you have to try and do what Iancu wants, and then you have to try to find a place where you're not intimidated to not do things that you think, I should do this, this would sound good here. So then you get into this interesting negotiation with Iancu, where you don't just wait for him to tell you what to do. You play what you want when you think it's appropriate, and only stop if he stops you. So, in fact, he's giving away power, Iancu, by essentially being much more dependent on the musicians. When it's scored, he's only dependent on them to interpret what he wants. With this situation, he's dependent on them to create content. He's dependent on them to be sympathetic to an understanding of what they think he wants, because he's not giving them the content anymore. He's giving them the expression, really, and sometimes some, very generalized. So that's quite interesting. That's quite unique, I think, because it's not like conduction. It's not like Butch Morris's ghastly attempts to control people with a whole bunch of signs which are quite specific, but which I personally think mostly didn't work, because the musicians were really stuck. I think that was not a comfortable place for them to be. And not like Frank Zappa, where the musicians were completely comfortable, where the signals were absolutely clear and you knew, with Iancu it's much more of a kind of real-time negotiation, and that's unique, I think. I don't think I've ever done anything quite like that before, because Iancu does come with all that baggage. So you know who you're working with, and you know what's wanted in general, and you also know that you're there to serve, basically. You're not there to express yourself. But at the same time, part of serving is filling in all those details which are no longer in the score, which you know should be there and which he hasn't got the time to give you. They're both great at what they do, on a level where you've gone past the top. So now you're in the Hyperion where everything is just great, full stop.